Good morning. Page 37 on Chapter 2 of Part 5, Volume 3. The first whiff of revolution. Dismayed by the hopeless length of my sentence, stunned by my first acquaintance with the world of Gulag, I could never have believed at the beginning of my time that my spirit would recover by degrees from its dejection, that as the years went by, I should ascend so gradually that I was hardly aware of it myself, to an invisible peak of the archipelago, as though it were a Mauna Loa on Hawaii, and from there gaze serenely over distant islands, and even feel the lure of the treacherous, shimmering sea between. The middle part of my sentence I served on a golden isle, where prisoners were given enough to eat and drink and kept warm and clean. In return for all this, not much was required of me, just 12 hours a day sitting at a desk and making myself agreeable to the bosses. But clinging to these good things suddenly became distasteful. I was groping for some new way to make sense of prison life. Looking around me, I realized how contemptible was the advice of the special assignment prisoner from Krasnaya Presnya. At all costs, steer clear of general duties. The price we were paying seemed disproportionately high. Prison released in me the ability to write, and I now gave all my time and passion to this passion, brazenly neglecting my boring office work. There was something I had come to value more than butter and sugar they gave me. Standing on my own feet again. Well, they jerked a few of us to our feet, en route to a special camp. It took a long time getting us there, 3 months. It could be done more quickly with horses in the 19th century. So long that this journey became, as it were, a distinct period in my life, and it seems to me that my character and outlook changed it in the course of it. The journey was bracing, cheerful, full of good omens. A refreshing breeze buffeted our faces, the wind of katorga and of freedom. People and incidents pressed in on every hand to assure us that justice was on our side, not with our judges and jailers. The Butyrki, our old home, greeted us with a heart-rending female shriek from a window, probably that of a solitary confinement cell. Help, save me, they're killing me, they're killing me. Then the cries were choked in the warder's hands. At the Butyrki station, we were mixed up with raw recruits of the 1949 intake. They all had funny sentences, not the usual tenors but quarters. When, at each of the numerous roll calls, they had to give dates of release, it sounded like a cruel joke. October 1974, February 1975. Excuse me. No one surely could sit out such a sentence. A man must get a hold of some pliers and cut the wire. These 25-year sentences were enough to transform the prisoner's world. The holders of power had bombarded us with all they had. Now it was the prisoner's turn to speak freely, uninhibitedly, undeterred by threats, the words we had never heard in our lives, and which alone could enlighten and unite us. We were sitting in a stolo-pit car at the Kazan station when we heard from the station loudspeaker that war had broken out in Korea. After penetrating a firm South Korean defense line to drop a depth of 10 kilometers on the first day, the North Koreans insisted that they had been attacked. An imbecile who had been at the front understood that the aggressors were those who had advanced on the first day. This war in Korea excited us even more. In our rebellious mood, we longed for the storm. The storm must break. It must, or else we were doomed to a lingering death. Somewhere past Ryazan, the red days of the rising sun struck with such force through the mole's-eye windows of the prison car that the young guard in the corridor near our grating screwed up his eyes. Our guards might have been worse. They had crammed us into compartments 15 or so at a time. They fed us on herring, but to be fair, they also brought us water and let us out morning and evenings to relieve ourselves, so that we should have had no quarrel with them. If this lad had unthinkingly, not maliciously, tossed the words enemies of the people at us, that started it. Our compartment and the next pitched into him. All right, we're the enemies of the people, but why is there no grub on the Chekhov? You're a country boy yourself by the look of you. I bet you'll sign on again. I bet you'd sooner be a dog on a chain than go back to the plow. If we're enemies of the people, why paint the prison vans different colors? Who are you hiding us from? Listen, kid, I had two like you who never came back from the war, and you call me an enemy of the people. It was a very long time since words like that had flown through the bars of our cages. We shouted only the plainest of facts, too self-evident to be refuted. A sergeant serving extra time came to the aid of the flustered youngster, but instead of hauling away anyone off to the cooler or taking names, he tried to help his subordinate to fight back. Here too we saw a faint hint that times were changing. No, this was 1950, too soon to speak of better times. What we saw were signs of the new relationship between prisoners and jailers, created by the new long sentences and the new political camps. Our argument began to take on the character of a genuine debate. The young men took a good look at us and could no longer bring themselves to call us, or those in the next compartment, enemies of the people. They tried trotting out bits from newspapers and from their elementary political course, but their ears told them before their minds could that this set of phrases rang false. Look for yourselves, lads. Look out the window. That was the answer they got from us. Look at what you brought Russia down to. Beyond the windows stretched a beggarly land of rotted thatch and rickety huts and ragged folk. We were on the Ryazan line, but which foreigners never travel. If the Golden Horde had seen it so befouled, they would not have bothered to conquer it. On the quiet station at Torbeyeva, an old man walked along the platform in bast shoes. An old peasant woman stopped opposite the lowered window of our car and stood rooted to the spot for a long time, staring through the outer and inner bars at us prisoners. Us prisoners tightly packed together on the top bed shelf. She stared at us with that look on her face which our people have kept for unfortunates through the ages. A few tears trickled down her cheeks. She stood there, work coarsened and shabby, and she looked at us as though a son of hers lay among us. You mustn't look in there, Mama, the guard told her, but not roughly. She didn't even turn her head. At her side stood a little girl of 10 with white ribbons in her plaits. She looked at us very seriously with a sadness strange in one of her years, her little eyes wide and unblinking. She looked at us so hard that she must have imprinted us on her memory forever. As the train eased forward, the old woman raised her blackened fingers and devoutly, unhurriedly, made the sign of the cross over us. Then at another station, some girl, in a spotted frock, anything but shy or timid, came right up to our window and started boldly asking us what we were in for and for how long. "Get away," bellowed the guard, who was pacing the platform. "Why, what will you do?" "I'm the same as them. Here's a pack of cigarettes. Give it to the lads." And she produced them from her handbag. We had already realized that the girl had done time. So many of them, now roaming and free, had received their training on the archipelago. The deputy guard commander jumped out of the train. "Get away, I'll put you inside." She stared scornfully at the old sweat's ugly mug. "You go and blank yourself, you blank." "Give it to him, lads," she said to encourage us, and made a dignified departure. So we rode on, and I don't think the guards felt that they were protecting the people from its enemies. On we went, more and more inflamed with the conviction that we were right, and that all of Russia was with us. That the time was at hand to abolish this institution. At the Kubyshev transit prison, we were sunbathed, i.e. loafed for more than a month. More workers came our way. The air was suddenly rent by the sickening, hysterical yells of thieves. They even whine in a loathsome, shrill way. "Help, get us out of here, the fascists are beating us, fascists." Here's what's something new, fascists beating thieves. It always used to be the other way around. But shortly after, there was a reshuffle of prisoners, and we found that no miracles had happened yet. It was only the first swallow. Pavel Barnik, his chest was millstone. His gnarled hands were ever ready for a friendly clasp or a blow. He was dark in complexion, aquiline, more like a Georgian than a Ukrainian. He had been an officer at the front, had prevailed in a machine gun duel with 3 Messerschmitts, and had been recommended for the Order of the Hero of the Soviet Union, and turned down by the special section, had to be sent to a punitive battalion, and returned with a decoration. And now he had a tenor, which, as times now were, was hardly a man's sentence. He had sized up the thieves, while he was still on his way from the jail at Novograd-Volynsk, and had fought with them before. Now he was sitting in the next cell on the upper bed platform, quietly playing chess. The whole cell were 58s, but the administration had slipped 2 thieves in among them. On his way to clear his rightful sleeping space by the window, a Belamore cigarette dangled carelessly from his lip. Fixati said jokingly, "Might have known they'd put me with gangsters again." The naive Philippe, who didn't know much about thieves, hastened to reassure him. "No, we're all 58s here. What about you?" "I'm an embezzler. I'm an educated man." The thieves chased the 2 men away, slung their own sacks onto their reserved places, and walked through the cell examining other people's sacks and looking for trouble. The 58s, no, they hadn't changed yet. They put up no resistance. 60 grown men waited tamely for their turn to be robbed. There is something hypnotically disarming about the impudence of thieves, who never for a moment expect to meet resistance. Besides, they can always count on the support of authority. Boronyuk went on pretending to move his chessmen, but by now he's rolling his eyes in fury and wondering how best to take care of them. When one of the thieves stopped in front of him, he swung his dangling foot and booted him in his ugly face, then jumped down, grabbed the stout wooden lid of the sanitary bucket, and brought it down in a stunning blow on the thief's head. Then he began hitting them alternately with the lid until it fell to pieces, leaving its base with 2 solid bars joined crosswise in his hands. The thieves changed their tune to a pathetic whine, but it must be admitted that there was a certain humor in their moms, that they seemed to see the funny side of it. What do you think you're doing, hitting people with a cross? Just because you're strong, you shouldn't bully others. Baranya kept on hitting them until one of the thieves rushed over to the window shouting, "Help, the fascists are beating us." Thieves never forgot it, and threatened Baranya many times afterwards. "You smell like a dead man already. We'll take you with us." But they never attacked him again. Soon afterward, our cell also clashed with the bitches. We were out in the yard to stretch our legs and relieve ourselves while we were at it, when a woman prison officer sent a trustee to chase some of us out to the latrine. His arrogance to the politicals outraged Volodya Gershuni, a high-strung youngish man recently sentenced. Volodya pulled the trustee up short, and the trustee felled the lad with a blow. Previously, the 58s would simply have swallowed this, but now Maxim, the Azerbaijani, who had killed the chairman of his kolkhoz, threw a stone at the trustee while Baranyak laid one on his jaw. He slashed Baranyak with his knife. The warden's assistants went around with knives. There was nothing unusual in this, and ran to the warders for protection, with Baranyak chasing him. They quickly herded us all into the cell, and the senior prison officers arrived to discover who was to blame and threaten us with additional sentences for gang fighting. The MVD man's heart always bleeds for his nearest and dearest, his trustees. Baranyak's blood was up, and he stepped forward of his own accord. "I beat those bastards, and I'll go on beating them as long as I live." The Godfather warned us that we counter-revolutionaries couldn't afford to put on airs, and that it would be safer for us to hold our tongues. At this up jumped Volodya Gershuni. He was hardly more than a boy, his first-year university student when he was arrested, and not just a namesake, but nephew of that Gershuni who once commanded the Socialist Revolutionary Terrorist Squad. He screamed at the Godfather, as shrill as a fighting cock, "Don't dare call us counter-revolutionaries. That's all the past. We are revolutionaries. Again now. Revolutionary. Again now. Against the Soviet state this time. How we enjoyed ourselves. This was the day we'd lived for." And the Godfather just frowned and scowled and swallowed it all. Nobody was taken off to lock up, and the prison officers beat an inglorious retreat. Was this how life in prison would be from now on? Could we then fight, turn on our tormentors, say out loud just what we thought? At that time, we had endured it all, like idiots. It's fun beating people who weep easily. We wept, so they beat us. Now, in the legendary new camps to which they were taking us, where men wore number patches as in Nazi camps, but where there would at last be only political prisoners cleansed of the slimy criminal scum. Perhaps the new life would begin. Volodya Gershuni, with his dark eyes and his peaked, dead white face, said hopefully, "Once we get to the camp, we shall soon know with whom we belong. Silly lad, did he seriously expect to find there a vigorous political life, with parties of many different shades, feverishly contending, discussions, programs, underground meetings, with whom we belong, as though the choice had been left to us, as though those who drew the target figures for arrest in each republic, and the bills of lading for camp transport trains had not decided for us. In our very long cell, once a stable, with 2 lines of 2-tier bed platforms where the 2 rows of mangers used to stand, with pillars made of crooked tree trunks along the aisle propping up a decrepit roof, with the typical stable windows in the long wall, shaped so that the hay could be forked straight into the mangers, and made narrowed by muzzles. In our cell there were 120 men of all sorts and conditions. More than half of them were from the Baltic states, uneducated people, simple peasants. The second purge was underway in that area, and all who would not voluntarily join the collective farms, or who were suspected in advance of reluctance to join, were being imprisoned or deported. Then there were quite a few West Ukrainians, members of the OUN, together with anyone who had once given them a night's rest or a meal. Then there were prisoners from the Russian Soviet Federation, with fewer new boys among them, most of them repeaters, and of course a certain number of foreigners. We were all being taken to the same camp complex. We found out from the records clerk that it was the step-leg group. I looked carefully at those with whom fate had brought me together and tried to see into their minds. I found the Estonians and Lithuanians particularly congenial. Although I was no better off than they were. They made me feel ashamed, as though I were the one who had put them inside. Unspoiled, hard-working, true to their word, unassuming. What had they done to be ground into the same mill as ourselves? They had harmed no one, lived a quiet, ordinary life, and a more moral life than ours, and now they were to blame because we were hungry, because they lived by the cheek and they lived cheek by jowl with us and stood in our path to the sea. I am ashamed to be Russian, cried Herzen. When we were choking the life out of Poland, I felt doubly ashamed at the presence of these inoffensive and defenseless people. My attitude to the Latvians was more complicated. There was a fatality in their plight. They had sown the seed themselves, and the Ukrainians, we have long ago stopped saying Ukrainian nationalists, but we speak only of banderists, and this has become such a dirty word that no one thinks of inquiring into the reality. We also called them bandits, following our established rule that anyone, anywhere, who kills for us is partisan, whereas those who kill us are always bandits, beginning with the Tambov peasants in 1921. The reality is that although long ago, in the Kiev period, we and the Ukrainians constituted a single people, we have since then been torn asunder, and our lives, our customs, our languages, for centuries past have taken widely different paths. The so-called reunion was very awkward, though perhaps in the minds of some, a sincere effort to restore our former brotherhood. But we have not made good use of the 3 centuries since. No statesman in Russia ever gave much thought to the problem of binding Ukrainians and Russians together in kinship, of smoothing out the lumpy seam. Had the join been neater, the first Ukrainian committees would not have been formed in spring 1917, nor in the Rada later on. The Bolsheviks, before they came to power, found the problem uncomplicated. In Pravda, for June 7, 1917, Lenin wrote as follows, quote, "We regard the Ukraine and other regions not inhabited by great Russians as territories annexed by the Tsar and the capitalists," unquote. He wrote this when the Central Rada was already in existence. Then on November 2nd, 1917, the Declaration of Rights of the Peoples of Russia was adopted. Was it meant as a joke? Was it just a trick? When they declared that the peoples of Russia did indeed have the right to self-determination, up to including secession? 6 months later, the Soviet government requested the good offices and the Kaiser's Germany in helping Soviet Russia to conclude peace and define its boundaries with Ukraine. And Lenin signed a treaty to this effect with Hetman Skoropadsky on June 14, 1918. By doing so, he showed himself fully reconciled to the detachment of the Ukraine, even if it became a monarchy as a result. But strangely enough, as soon as the Germans were defeated by the Entente, which could not affect in the least the principles governing our relations with Ukraine, as soon as a hetman had fallen, together with his patrons, as soon as we proved stronger than the Petlura, there's another word of abuse, Petluravite, but these were merely Ukrainian townsfolk and peasants who wanted to order their lives without our interference. We immediately crossed the border which we had recognized and imposed our rule on our blood brothers. True, 15 to 20 years afterward, we made a great play with Ukrainian language, pushed it perhaps too hard, and impressed it upon our brothers that were completely independent and could break away whenever they pleased. Yet, when they tried to do so, at the end of the war, we denounced them as bandits and started hunting them down, torturing them and executing them, or dispatching them to the camps. But bandits like Petlurovites are just Ukrainians who do not want to be ruled by others. Once they discovered that Hitler would not bring them the freedom they had been promised, they fought against the Germans as well as ourselves throughout the war. But we kept quiet about this, since like the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, it shows us in an unfavorable light. Why are we so exasperated by Ukrainian nationalism, by the desire of our brothers to speak, educate their children, and write their shop signs in their own language? Even Mikhail Bulgakov in the White Guard let himself be misled on the subject, given that we have not succeeded in fusing completely, that we are still different in some respects, and it is insufficient that they, a smaller nation, feel it is sufficient, feel the difference, that however sad it may be, we have missed chance after chance, especially in the 30s and 40s, that the problem came most acute under the Tsar, but not under the Tsar, but after the Tsar. Why does their desire to secede annoy us so much? Can't we part with the Odessa beaches, or the fruits of Circassia? For me, this is a painful subject. Russia and Ukraine are united in my blood, my heart, my thoughts. But from friendly contact with Ukrainians in the camps over a long period, I have learned how sore they feel. Our generation cannot avoid paying for the mistakes of generations before it. Nothing is easier than stamping your foot and shouting, "That's mine." It is immeasurably harder to proclaim, "You may." You may live as you please. We cannot, in the latter end of the 20th century, live in the imaginary world in which our last, not very bright emperor came to grief. Surprising though it may be, the prophecy of our vanguard doctrine, that nationalism would fade, has not come true. In the age of the atom, and of cybernetics, it has, for some reason, blossomed afresh. Sorry. Like it or not, the time is at hand when we must pay out all our promissory notes guaranteeing self-determination and independence, pay up of our own accord, and not wait to be burned at the stake, drowned in rivers, or beheaded. We must prove our greatness as a nation, not by the vastness of its territory, not by the number of its peoples under our tutelage, but by the grandeur of our actions, and by the depth of our tilth in the lands that remain, which those who do not wish to live with us are gone. The Ukraine will be an extremely painful problem, but we must realize that the feelings of the whole people are now a white heat, since the two peoples have not succeeded over the centuries in living harmoniously. It is up to us to show sense. We must leave the decision to the Ukrainians themselves. Let federalists and separatists try their persuasions. Not to give way would be foolish, foolhardy, and cruel, and the gentler, the more tolerant, the more careful to explain ourselves we are now, the more hope there will be restoring unity in the future. Let them live their own lives. Let them see how it works. They will soon find that not all problems are solved by secession. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.